Hey, welcome back or welcome for the first time. To all my new listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. To all of my day 1, 8, 115, 276, or whatever week you chose to tune in and keep listening, you already know I genuinely appreciate y'all. So today we're talking about letting go. And I know that sounds real peaceful and mature, and it sounds like something you'd put on a cute little quote graphic. But letting go can be extremely difficult because sometimes letting go isn't just deleting the text thread, and it's not just unfollowing the person or saying I'm done. Sometimes letting go is grieving what you hope something would become. Sometimes it's accepting that what you wanted and what God allowed are not lining up the way you thought they would. And that can be really hard, especially when you genuinely believe something was going to go a certain way. Maybe you prayed about it, maybe you waited for it, or maybe you felt like there were signs or open doors or these little moments that made you think, okay, maybe this is God. And then somehow it still didn't turn out the way that you thought it would. And I think that's one of the reasons letting go can feel so complicated. Because a lot of times you're not just letting go of what happened, you're letting go of what you thought it meant. So you're letting go of the possibility, the potential, and the version of the story you had already started writing in your mind. And listen, I'm not judging because I get it, like I've done that. And I've definitely tried to release things while still wanting to know exactly what God was going to do with them. Like, okay, God, I gave it to you, but did you get it? Did you see it? Is there an update? Are we even still working on this, or are you actually asking me to move on? Because I'm trying to let go, but I would also love to know what you're doing with this thing that I just placed in your hands. And that's where letting go gets tricky, because sometimes we say we're letting go, but what we really mean is, God, I'll stop touching it as long as you still do what I want you to do with it. And I think if we're honest, a lot of us have been there, because real surrender is not just about removing your hands, it's about releasing your outcome. It's saying, God, I don't just trust you to hold this, I trust you to decide what happens next. And I'm going to be honest, because that part can feel really scary. It's one thing to say, God, I trust you, when you still think he's going to do what you want. But it's another thing to trust him when you don't know if he's going to restore it, replace it, remove it completely, or just ask you to move forward without it. And that is where surrender becomes real. And I think some of us have learned how to release things physically while we're still carrying them, though, emotionally. Like we walked away, but we're still rehearsing the conversation, or we stopped reaching out, but we're still looking for signs, or we said we're over it, but deep down there may still be a part of us hoping that the story circles back and finally gives us the ending that we wanted. And I don't say that to cause shame. I say that because sometimes we need language for where we actually are, because you can't heal from what you keep pretending doesn't hurt. You can't fully release what you keep minimizing, and you can't surrender something to God while still trying to control the emotional narrative of it in your heart. And letting go requires honesty. And I don't mean the kind of honesty where you say the right thing because it sounds mature. I mean the kind of honesty where you sit with God and say, I wanted that, I missed that, I thought that was you, I'm disappointed, and I don't understand why you let me care that much if it wasn't going to work out. And I know sometimes we feel like we can't say that to God because we think we have to clean it up first before we bring it to him. But God is not intimidated by your honesty. He's not shocked by your disappointment, and he's not sitting in heaven surprised by how you feel, because he already knows. He already sees the part you're struggling to say out loud. He sees the place where you're trying to be mature, but you're also tired. He sees the tension between your faith and your frustration. And I think sometimes the beginning of letting go is telling God the truth about where you actually are. Because surrender without honesty can turn into performance, and we can't perform our way into having peace. So we can look like we've let go, while still carrying the weight of it every day. We can say the right things, post the right quotes, give the mature answer, and still be wrestling with it when everything gets quiet. And that's why we have to let God into the part of us that's still attached, the part that's still asking questions, the part that still wonders if maybe we should have done something differently, and the part that keeps replaying it, analyzing it, and trying to make it make sense. Because sometimes we hold on because we think understanding will bring closure, and we think if we can figure out why it happened, why they said that, why it ended that way, or why the timing didn't work, then we'll finally be able to move on. And sometimes God does give clarity, but sometimes he gives peace before he gives an explanation. And that can be difficult at times because I don't know about y'all, but I like details, I like timelines, I like answers, I like a little behind the scenes understanding, like, Lord, I don't need to know everything, but could you maybe give me a short summary? Just a little recap, just enough to help this make sense. But things don't always play out that way because sometimes God is inviting us to trust him even when we don't understand it all. And I know that sounds good, but it's not easy because trust can feel risky when you're letting go of something you deeply wanted. And that's especially true when you feel like you've already lost before, or when you've had to start over so many times that you're tired of getting your hopes up again. Because when you've been disappointed before, letting go can feel like agreeing to be disappointed again. It can feel like opening your hands and not knowing if anything good is going to be placed back in them. And I think we need to be honest about that because letting go can bring up a lot of emotions. You can know something needed to end and still feel sad about it. And you can believe God protected you and still miss what was familiar. Or you can know something wasn't healthy and still feel the weight of walking away from it. But I want to lovingly say that the fact that it hurts does not mean you made the wrong decision. Obedience can hurt, healing can hurt, and freedom can feel uncomfortable at first because your heart is still adjusting to life without the thing you were used to carrying. And even peace can feel unfamiliar when you've been living on edge for so long. And God has to heal that too, because sometimes what we're letting go of goes deeper than a person, a plan, a dream, or a situation. Sometimes God is also healing the survival patterns connected to it. He's dealing with the need to control everything, the belief that everything will fall apart if we're not constantly alert, and the way we can start tying our worth to whether or not something worked out. And that can be hard to admit because letting go can feel like failure. It can feel like admitting you were wrong or that you cared too much or that you wasted your time. And even when none of that is true, it can still feel that way when your heart is disappointed. But letting go is not failure. Sometimes letting go is wisdom. Sometimes it's obedience. Sometimes it's protection. And sometimes it's God making room for something healthier, even if you can't see it yet. And I think we have to be careful not to confuse attachment with assignment, because just because something had your heart does not mean it had God's permission to keep you stuck. And just because you loved it does not mean it was supposed to last forever. And lastly, just because it mattered does not mean it was meant to move forward with you. And I know that can feel uncomfortable, but it can also be freeing because some of us are trying to carry things into a new season that God already gave us grace to release. But we feel guilty, we feel responsible, we feel afraid, or we feel like if we let go, then everything we invested was a waste. But nothing is wasted with God. Not the lessons, the growth, the tears, the prayers, or the version of you that had to learn how to survive it. God can use even what you had to release to grow, heal, and strengthen you. And I want you to really think about that for a second, because sometimes we think redemption means God gives it back, but sometimes redemption means God frees you from needing it back. Sometimes redemption looks like being able to think about it without spiraling, or it can look like wishing someone well and still choosing to keep walking. It can look like no longer blaming yourself for what you didn't know, and sometimes it looks like finally having peace, even without the apology, the explanation, or the closure conversation. And that matters because some of us are waiting for closure from people who are not emotionally capable of giving it. Some of us are waiting for clarity from situations that were confusing because they were unhealthy. Or some of us are waiting for someone else to validate our pain before we give ourselves permission to heal. But you don't need their permission to be free, and you don't need their apology to start healing. You also don't need every detail to decide that you're done carrying this. Now, does that mean it's easy? No, it definitely doesn't. And I really wish it did mean that. Like, imagine being able to say, I let it go, and then your heart's like, okay, cool, we're good, right? That would be great. But usually letting go is not one whole dramatic moment. It's actually a daily decision. It's waking up and choosing not to keep revisiting the same pain as a place of residence. It's choosing not to check, rehearse, or reopen the door just because you feel lonely, disappointed, unsure, or maybe even curious. And sometimes we don't pick things back up because they're good for us. Sometimes we pick them back up because they're familiar, and familiar can feel safe even when it's not healthy. That's why letting go requires more than distance. It requires healing, because you can be far away from something and still emotionally attached to it. You can be in a new season while still mentally living in an old one. Or you can say you're moving forward, but every time things get quiet, your mind goes right back to that same place. So maybe the question isn't, what do I need to let go of? Maybe the question is, what am I afraid will happen if I release this? Because sometimes we're holding on because we're afraid that there won't be anything else. We're afraid we won't love again, dream again, or get another opportunity. We can also be afraid that if we let go, we'll have to face the grief, or maybe we're afraid that if we let go, God won't replace it the way we want him to. And I'm going to be honest, because that is something that I really struggle with sometimes, because trusting God doesn't mean he gives us the exact replacement we imagine. Sometimes he does something completely different, or he changes our desires, or he heals us until we don't even want the same things in the same way anymore. And sometimes he gives us better, but better doesn't always look familiar at first. And that can be difficult because familiar has a pull. Even when something drained you, confused you, or made you question yourself, there can still be a part of you that reaches for it because it's what you know. But I want to say this gently. You can't fully receive what God is trying to place in your hands if your fists are still clenched around what he's asking you to release. And I know that sounds like one of those lines where you're like, okay, so can I unclench slowly though? And honestly, yeah. You can be honest about the process. God is not asking you to fake strength, and he's not asking you to act like it doesn't hurt. He's also not asking you to rush your grief so you can look more spiritually mature, but he is inviting you to trust him with open hands. And open hands are vulnerable. They're honest. They say, God, I wanted this, but I want you more. I don't understand this, but I trust your heart. Or they say, I'm scared, but I'm still choosing surrender, and I release what's been holding me because I believe you're still holding me. And maybe that's the deeper work of letting go. It's not just releasing the thing, it's remembering that you're still held. Because sometimes when something leaves, it can feel like security, identity, and even our hope leave with it. But God is still there, and he was there before it happened, and he was there while it was happening, and he's going to still be there after it ends. And I know that doesn't erase the grief, but it gives the grief somewhere to go. It gives the pain a place to be held, and it gives your heart somewhere safe to land. So Psalm 55:22 says, cast your burden on the Lord and he will sustain you. And I love that because it doesn't say cast your burden on the Lord and he will immediately explain everything. It says he will sustain you, meaning he'll carry you, he'll strengthen you, he'll help you keep breathing, keep moving, keep healing, and keep trusting even when it's hard, even when it's slow, and even when you feel like you should be further along by now. Now let's talk about that for a second. Because sometimes we shame ourselves for not letting go fast enough. We start asking ourselves, why do I still care? Why am I still thinking about this? Why does this still bother me? Why am I not over it yet? But healing isn't always fast and letting go isn't always instant. And sometimes the fact that you're still tender in an area does not mean that you're failing. It means God is still healing something deeper within you. So you have to give yourself grace, but don't use grace as an excuse to stay stuck. Because there's a difference between giving yourself time and giving yourself permission to keep reopening what God is trying to close. There's a difference between grieving and just camping out in the grief. And there's a difference between processing something and obsessing over it. And only you and God really know the difference in your heart. So it may be worth asking, am I processing this or am I replaying it? Am I healing or am I hoping it comes back? Am I seeking wisdom or am I looking for a loophole? Or am I surrendering it? Or am I still negotiating? Because sometimes our prayers sound like surrender, but underneath them is a negotiation. Like, God, your will be done, but also here are my preferred terms and conditions. And listen, I understand because letting go doesn't mean you stop wanting good things. And it's not wrong to want love, clarity, the dream to happen, or things to turn out beautifully. But surrender says, God, I want those things, but I refuse to make them my God. I refuse to let this desire control me. I refuse to let this disappointment define me. I refuse to let this closed door convince me that you're not good. And I refuse to let what didn't happen become the lens through which I see my future. Because sometimes the enemy wants to use what you lost to make you suspicious of what God still has. He wants you to believe that because this hurts, nothing good is going to happen to you. That because this ended, you missed it. That because this didn't work, you're behind. That because this person walked away, you're not worthy. Or because that door closed, you'll never get another one. But that's not God, because God doesn't waste seasons and he doesn't forget his children, and he doesn't need what you lost in order to bless you, because what's for you will not require you to abandon yourself to keep it. What is for you will require wisdom, obedience, and stewardship, but it won't require self-betrayal. It won't require you to live in constant anxiety, beg for basic care, or shrink so something else can stay comfortable. And sometimes letting go is finally agreeing with God about your own value. It's saying, I don't have to chase what God has not called me to chase. I don't have to force what God isn't breathing on. I don't have to keep carrying what is costing me my peace. And I don't have to prove my worth by how long I can endure something God is trying to rescue me from. And this applies to more than just relationships. It can be a mindset, a friendship, a job, a version of yourself, a timeline, a dream, a habit, an expectation, a wound, or even the need to be understood, to be right, or to control the outcome. Because sometimes letting go is not even about something being bad. Sometimes it's about something good that has reached the end of its assignment. And that can be confusing too, because we tend to think if something is from God, it's going to last forever. But sometimes God gives us grace for a season, and then he gives us grace to release it. And both can be meaningful. The beginning can be meaningful, and the ending can be meaningful too. The joy, the grief, and even the release all matter, because God is not only present when things are being added to your life, He's also present when things are being removed. And I know removal doesn't always feel like love. Sometimes it feels like loss, rejection, silence, or even confusion. It can leave you asking God, what are you doing? But one day you may look back and realize how much you needed it. You may see that the ending protected your future, that the silence revealed what words would have covered up, or that the closed door saved you from a version of life that looked good but would have drained you. And maybe you'll realize that letting go was not God punishing you, it was actually God making room. And maybe not room for the thing you expected, but it's making room for peace, healing, clarity, obedience, and the version of you who is no longer attached to what almost broke you. And I think that's beautiful. It's not easy, but it is beautiful, because not having to manage every outcome is freeing. Not having to keep something alive that God isn't sustaining is freeing. And there's something really powerful about being able to say, I loved that, I wanted that, I hoped for that, but I release it. And there's freedom in trusting that God knows what to do with what I can no longer carry. So maybe the prayer isn't, God, help me stop caring. Maybe the prayer is, God, help me trust you with what I still care about. Because sometimes we think letting go means we have to become numb, but God isn't asking us to become numb. He's asking us to become surrendered. And there's a difference. When you're numb, you stop caring because caring hurts. But when you're surrendered, you can care deeply and still trust God more. Numbness will build walls, but surrender opens your hands. Numbness avoids pain, but surrender brings pain to God. Numbness says, I'll never want anything again, but surrender says, God, heal me so I can want again without fear controlling me. And maybe that's where some of us are. We don't just need to let go. We need to let God heal the fear that came from what we had to release. Because after disappointment, it can feel safer not to hope. It can feel safer to stay guarded, or it can feel safer to expect the worst so you're not surprised when things don't work out. And technically that sounds calm and trusting, but sometimes this isn't coming from a place of peace. Sometimes it's self-protection, or sometimes it's us trying not to care because caring feels too risky. But I believe God wants to heal that too. Not so we become careless, ignore red flags, or walk around with no wisdom, but so our hearts don't stay locked in the place where we got hurt. Because God still has life for you after this. He still has joy for you after this. He still has purpose for you after this. And he still has peace for you after this. And I don't know what your this is, but I do know God is not finished. So if you're in a season of letting go, I want to encourage you to be honest with God. Tell him where it hurts. Tell him what you wanted. Tell him what you're afraid of, and tell him what you don't understand. And then ask him for the grace to release it one day at a time. Not to perform peace, fake healing, or rush the process, but to really surrender, to really trust, to really open your hands. And maybe today letting go looks like deleting the message. Maybe it looks like stopping the mental replay. Maybe it looks like admitting you're disappointed. Maybe it looks like accepting that the apology may never come, or maybe it looks like grieving the dream without letting the grief become your identity. Maybe letting go looks like saying, God, I don't know what you're doing, but I trust you more than I trust my fear. And that matters because every time you choose surrender, something in you gets free. Every time you choose not to pick it back up, something in you gets stronger. And every time you let God hold what you used to carry, you make room for peace. And I know letting go can feel like losing, but sometimes letting go is how you finally win your peace back. Sometimes letting go is how you come back to yourself. Sometimes letting go is how God teaches you that your life is not over just because something ended. So my hope and prayer for you is that you would have the courage to release what God is asking you to release, not because it didn't matter and not because it didn't hurt, And not because you have all the answers, but because you trust the one who is holding you. And I hope you stop confusing holding on with being faithful. I hope you stop calling anxiety commitment. And I hope you stop carrying what God has already gave you permission to lay down. And I hope you remember that open hands are not empty hands. They're available hands, available for peace, healing, obedience, and whatever God wants to do next. So let it go, one breath at a time, one prayer at a time, and one obedient step at a time. Because God can be trusted with what you release, and he can be trusted with you. So that's what I have for y'all this week. As always, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure you're taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. Be healthy in your relationships. I love y'all so much, and I will talk to y'all soon. Bye.